Snow fell gently around Cora Lane as she stumbled into the snow-dusted yard of a ranch, the flakes clinging to her faded dress. Her boots crunched through the icy crust, kicking up powdery clouds as she made her way toward the small house in the distance. Sweat soaked through her clothes despite the biting cold, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps, visible in the frosty air. She wasn't sure how far she had walked, but it didn't matter. She just needed a place to hide, somewhere she could catch her breath before the world caught up with her again. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, hearing nothing but the wind whispering through the snow-laden grass. The silence felt too calm, almost unnatural. Her heart raced, and every time a bird fluttered nearby, she jumped, convinced that Marcus Steele's men were right behind her. They had been chasing her for days, never giving her a moment's peace. They would come. They always came. The ranch house was small, modest even. It didn't look like much. The windows were cracked, the paint on the porch worn, but it stood alone, far from town and out of the way, blanketed in snow. The kind of place where a woman might disappear. Cora hesitated, standing at the edge of the yard, the snowflakes dusting her hair, unsure if she should take another step. This wasn't just any ranch. This was Silas Ward's ranch, a man known for his quiet strength and solitary ways. He wasn't the kind of man who welcomed strangers, especially not women like her, women with dark pasts and dangerous men chasing them. Still, she couldn't keep running forever. The weariness in her bones, the ache in her chest, reminded her that she couldn't do this alone anymore. She needed somewhere to rest, someone who wouldn't turn her away. A door creaked open, and there, standing on the porch, was Silas Ward himself. He was a big man, built like the land he worked. Broad shoulders, rough hands, and eyes that saw more than anyone knew. He was quiet, but there was something in the way he stood that made it clear he wasn't a man to cross. His eyes moved over her, taking in the tattered state of her clothes, the way she stood, on edge, ready to bolt at any moment. Snow dusted his hat and shoulders, but there was no judgment in his gaze, only curiosity. The kind of curiosity that didn't ask too many questions. "Can I help you?" Silas's voice was low, steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't an offer. It was a question, pure and simple. Cora swallowed hard, her throat dry despite the cold. She tried to find her voice, but it wasn't easy. She had come this far, but the fear still held her tight. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid of being turned away or of having to explain herself. I saw your ad in the paper. I need work," she said finally, her words barely above a whisper, her breath clouding in the snowy air. "And a place to stay, if you're looking for help." The silence stretched between them like a tightrope, snow falling softly around them. Silas didn't move, didn't speak right away. Instead, he studied her, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to make sense of the story she wasn't telling. His ranch was quiet, peaceful, but a peace like that didn't come without a cost. He'd been through his own share of trouble that had left its mark on him. "I've got work for someone who can handle it," Silas said after a long moment, his eyes softening just a little. "But you've got to be ready for hard work. And this place isn't much for company." Cora nodded, barely holding back the relief she felt, her breath visible in the cold. She wasn't sure why she had come to him, but she was certain she had made the right choice. In his eyes, she could see something, a kindness, maybe, or just a sense of understanding. Maybe he had his own reasons for offering help. But right now, she didn't care. "I can work," she said, her voice steadier now, though still filled with the weight of her past. "I just need somewhere safe." Silas took a step back, motioning for her to come up onto the porch out of the falling snow. "All right then. You can stay for a while, but you'll need to earn your keep." His words were blunt, but there was a sincerity to them that made Cora feel, for the first time in a long while, like she might just be able to stay. She stepped forward, her body aching with exhaustion, snow crunching under her boots, but she pushed through it. She was ready for whatever came next, as long as it meant safety. And as she followed Silas into the house, the door creaked shut behind her, sealing her fate, the snow continuing to fall outside. Cora didn't know how long it would last, this peace she'd found. But for now, it was enough. She only hoped it would be enough to keep the past at bay. But that was a hope she wasn't sure she could afford to believe in. Silas didn't waste time with pleasantries. He showed Cora to a small, humble room at the back of the house, a place that had been vacant for years. The bed was simple, the floor creaky, but it had a warmth to it, a sense of quiet despite the snow piling up outside the window. It was better than the cold, endless road she'd been walking down for what felt like a lifetime. Cora sat on the edge of the bed, her hands still trembling as she looked out the window. The landscape beyond was vast, blanketed in snow, a white expanse that promised freedom but also reminded her how alone she really was. The hills stretched for miles in every direction, no neighbors for miles. It was the perfect place to disappear. She heard Silas moving around in the kitchen, his heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor, the sound muffled by the snow outside. He wasn't a man who hurried, but he worked fast and with purpose. Cora, still unsure of everything, tried to calm her nerves by focusing on the things around her. The cracks in the plaster, the worn-out rug, the quiet that surrounded her. The silence wasn't as comforting as it once had been. It was suffocating. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Silas came to the door. He didn't knock, just stood there, looking in at her with those steady eyes of his, snowflakes melting on his coat. "Dinner's ready," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. "You got to eat if you're going to make it through tomorrow." Cora nodded and stood, following him to the small kitchen, brushing snow from her shoulders. The air smelled of something simple but comforting, beans, bread, maybe some stew. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Silas had set the table for two, though it seemed more like a formality than anything else. His son wasn't around yet, and from the look on Silas's face, it was clear that he had been eating alone for quite a while. Cora sat across from him, feeling suddenly awkward. She hadn't planned on being here this long. She thought she'd take the job and leave once things settled down, but now that she was here, in this quiet little house with snow falling outside, she wasn't so sure. "I don't want to be a burden," Cora said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, but the words came out clear. She had to say something. She couldn't just sit here and take from him without giving anything in return. Silas looked at her, his eyes narrowing for a moment before softening. He set down his fork, and for a brief moment, there was something in his gaze, something that told Cora he understood. "You won't be," he said simply. "You've got skills. You'll work the land, help with the house, and I've got a son who could use a mother's touch." Cora flinched slightly at the mention of his son. It wasn't something she'd expected. The idea of being a mother felt foreign to her, like something that belonged to someone else. Her heart ached just thinking about it. She wasn't fit for that role, not after everything she'd been through. Silas seemed to notice her discomfort, and for a brief moment, he looked away, studying the remnants of his meal. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost like he was speaking more to himself than to her. "You don't have to be a mother if you don't want to," he said, "but I can't raise him alone much longer. I'm not cut out for it. You've seen how quiet this place is." Cora's gaze dropped to her hands. She hadn't expected this, wasn't sure what to make of it. A part of her wanted to reach out, to help, to step into a role she didn't feel prepared for. Another part of her was scared to death of being tied down again, of giving away pieces of herself she wasn't sure she could get back. "I can't promise to be what you need," she said quietly, her voice almost trembling. "But I can help with the work. I can pull my weight." Silas nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "That's all I need." The conversation drifted into more mundane topics, like the snowy weather and the chores that would need to be done the next day. But Cora couldn't shake the heaviness in her chest. She had come here seeking safety, But what Silas was offering wasn't just a place to hide. He was offering a role, a place in his world. He was asking her to stay, to build something together, a future. She didn't know if she was ready for that, but it wasn't like she had many choices left. She had nothing but this chance. The next morning, Cora woke early, the faint glow of dawn creeping through the window, softened by the snow still falling outside. The house was still, the air cold and quiet. Silas was already up, tending to the horses, or so she imagined, his boots leaving tracks in the fresh snow. There was something about this life, the simplicity of it, that felt both comforting and overwhelming. She had spent so many years running, hiding, that now, in this calm place, she felt both safe and exposed. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and heard Silas's footsteps outside, crunching through the snow. When she stood, she saw his son, a young boy about 7 or 8, standing in the doorway, clutching a small wooden toy, his cheeks red from a cold. His eyes were wide as he looked at Cora, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Silas's son didn't say much, but his presence was enough. He was a reminder of everything Cora had lost, the family she once dreamed of, the life she never had. She wanted to offer him kindness, but it felt strange. Could she really step into a mother's role after everything? As she stood to make her way outside to help with the chores, Silas caught her eye, snow dusting his hat. There was no judgment in his expression, just an understanding. He had his own reasons for wanting a mother figure for his son, and she knew that. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Just take it one step at a time." Cora nodded, grateful for his patience, pulling her coat tighter against the snowy chill. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She had a place here. For now, that was all she could ask for. The days after Cora's arrival at Silas's ranch were quieter than she expected, despite the constant snow. The flakes fell steadily during the day, covering the fields in a white blanket, and the nights were cold and still. She worked hard, taking on whatever tasks Silas needed help with, feeding the animals through the snow, mending the fences despite the cold, cooking simple meals for them both. Silas's son, a quiet boy named Jesse, warmed to her quickly, though there was always a hesitant distance in his eyes. He was shy, like his father, but with a curiosity that Cora found comforting, often playing in the snow outside. Each day was a reminder of how far she had come from her past, but also of how much she had yet to leave behind. Marcus Steele's name lingered in the back of her mind like a shadow. She could still see his cold, dark eyes and hear the harsh crack of his voice when he'd told her she could never leave. She had escaped him once, but she wasn't naive enough to think he would just forget about her. She was sure his men were out there, searching, tracking, waiting for any sign of her through the snowy trails. And one morning, her fear became a reality. Cora had been up before dawn, preparing breakfast for Silas and Jesse, the snow tapping lightly against the windows. The sound of the skillet sizzling, the warm scent of biscuits filling the air. It was a good start to another peaceful day. But then something changed. The air shifted, and a familiar unease settled deep in her chest. It wasn't the usual quiet of the ranch anymore. There was a tension in the air, an electric charge, even through the falling snow. Silas came into the kitchen, his face hard, his movements deliberate, snow clinging to his coat. He paused in the doorway, looking out the window toward the snow-covered dirt road leading up to the ranch. Cora felt her heart tighten as she followed his gaze. "You feel it too, don't you?" Silas asked, his voice low. He didn't need to say more. Cora already knew what he meant. "Steele's men," she whispered, her throat tightening. The very thought of them made her stomach churn. It had only been a matter of time before they found her. She'd been running for so long, but now, it seemed, the time for running was over. Silas didn't say anything more. He moved quietly to the back door, pausing for a moment to grab his rifle from the corner, brushing off the snow that had settled on it. Cora stood frozen, unable to tear her eyes away from the snow-dusted road, the place where she had hoped to leave all her past behind. Now, the past was coming for her, and for Silas and Jesse as well. The sound of hooves crunching through the snow began to grow louder. Cora's breath hitched, her breath visible in the cold air. She couldn't tell how many riders there were, but it didn't matter. Steele's men were known for being ruthless, and they didn't come all this way just to talk. Silas turned to her. "Stay inside. If they're looking for you, I'll handle it." But Cora couldn't stay inside. She wasn't about to hide while the men who had terrorized her for so long came onto Silas's land. She was done running. "I'm not hiding," she said firmly, her voice shaking but resolute. "I'll help." Silas's eyes softened for a brief moment, but the hardness returned quickly. He knew better than to argue. He was used to being alone, dealing with things on his own, but Cora wasn't just anyone. She had her own fight now. She wasn't about to let these men walk over them, and neither was Silas. The riders came into view just as Cora stepped out onto the porch, snow crunching under her boots. Silas moved to stand beside her, his hand on the rifle, his eyes scanning the approaching figures through the falling snow. The men were riding in a loose formation, but there was no mistaking who they were. They had the look of men who'd been on the trail for too long, their faces hardened by years of work and violence. At the head of the group was a tall, imposing figure, a man Cora recognized instantly. Frank Pierce, one of Steele's most loyal men. His dark eyes locked onto Cora from a distance, and she could see the moment he realized who she was. His mouth twisted into a sneer. Silas stepped forward, his rifle in hand, blocking the path of the riders, snow swirling around him. "You've got no business here," he called out, his voice calm but firm. "This is private property." Pierce didn't flinch. "I reckon it is, but we're not here for a friendly visit, Ward." He looked past Silas, his eyes narrowing as he caught sight of Cora standing on the porch. "That's who we're here for. We're taking her back to Steele. Now, step aside." Cora felt the blood drain from her face. She knew this moment was coming, but hearing Pierce say it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. They were here to take her back, to drag her through the snow and back into the hell she had just escaped from. But Silas didn't step aside. His hand gripped the rifle tighter, his jaw set in a hard line, snowflakes catching in his hair. "You're not taking anyone," Silas said, his voice colder now. "Not her. Not anyone on this ranch." Pierce laughed, the sound sharp and menacing. "You really think you can stop us? Steele will have you both dead before sundown. He'll burn this place down if he has to." Silas didn't flinch. His hand moved slowly, purposefully, as he lifted the rifle. Cora could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. Silas was standing between her and everything she had been running from. He wasn't just protecting her, he was offering her a chance at freedom. "We'll see about that," Silas said evenly. Frank Pierce's smile faded, and he signaled his men to dismount, their boots crunching in the snow. The tension in the air was palpable. Cora could hear the horses stomping nervously, the creak of saddles, the scrape of boots on the icy ground. But then, before anything could escalate further, a loud crack of a gunshot split the air. The sound echoed across the snowy fields, a clear warning. Cora's heart raced as she looked at Silas. Who fired? Was it one of his men? Or did Silas have an ally waiting in the wings? Pierce's men hesitated, looking around, unsure of what had just happened, snow falling heavily around them. "We're not alone, gentlemen," Silas said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Now, I suggest you leave before things get ugly." The sound of hooves grew louder as the riders dismounted, their boots thudding against the snowy ground. Cora's heart raced, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading. Marcus Steele's men were here, and this time, there would be no running. She looked at Silas, standing firm in front of her, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the men in front of him, snow dusting his shoulders. There was no hesitation in his stance. He was ready. "Get behind me, Cora," Silas said, his voice low and controlled, like a man who'd seen more than his share of violence and was prepared for whatever came next. Cora nodded, instinctively stepping back, though every part of her wanted to stay by his side. She wasn't going to run, not this time. But she obeyed, retreating behind Silas, her eyes locked on the men dismounting in front of them, their figures blurred by the falling snow. Frank Pierce, the leader of the group, took a step forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through Cora. He sneered at Silas, clearly unimpressed with the rancher's calm demeanor. "We're not here to negotiate," Pierce said with a cold smile. "We're here for the woman. She's coming with us, whether you like it or not." Silas didn't flinch. He simply nodded, his eyes never leaving Pierce's. "You're not taking her." "I'm not moving." The tension in the air was thick, so heavy Cora could almost taste it, the snow adding a chilling weight to the moment. The men behind Pierce were waiting, their hands resting on the handles of their guns. Cora could feel their eyes on her, hungry, cold, like wolves circling their prey. She shivered, but there was no time to fear. And then, out of the corner of her eye, Cora saw it. A figure, moving fast, darting through the snow-covered brush. Silas had been prepared for this. His warning had been subtle, but it was clear now. There were others. The sharp crack of another gunshot echoed through the air, muffled slightly by the snow. This time it was louder, closer. One of Pierce's men spun around, his hand clutching his shoulder where the bullet had struck. He collapsed to the ground with a grunt, the snow staining red beneath him. "Get down!" Silas shouted, throwing himself in front of Cora, using his body to shield her from any potential return fire. The moment was chaos. Gunfire erupted from the trees, sharp and sudden, catching Pierce's men off guard. They scattered, trying to take cover behind rocks and trees as they tried to assess where the shots were coming from, the snow swirling around them. Silas didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, taking the advantage of their confusion. He aimed his rifle, firing twice. One of Pierce's men fell with a yelp, his rifle clattering to the snowy ground. Cora's heart pounded in her chest as she watched Silas handle himself with calm precision. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but there was no time to dwell on it. She had to act. Cora stepped out from behind Silas, her hand reaching for the old rifle he had left by the door, brushing off the snow that had settled on it. Her fingers fumbled for a moment as she gripped the cold metal, but there was no time to hesitate. She had learned to shoot when she was younger, back when she still had something to protect. She raised a rifle and aimed at the nearest man. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, snowflakes catching in her eyelashes. The man was scrambling for cover, unaware that she had a clear shot. She squeezed the trigger, her hand steady, the sound of the shot ringing in the air. The man let out a grunt as he fell, his weapon dropping from his hand into the snow. The men were in disarray now, trying to regroup, but they were unprepared for the ambush. The firing continued, and soon, more of Steele's men were either injured or running for cover, retreating toward their horses through the snow. Cora stood frozen for a moment, her heart still racing. She had just fired her weapon and hit her mark. She wasn't sure what she expected, but the rush of power was immediate. It felt like a moment of clarity amidst the chaos. Silas, still holding his rifle, turned to look at her, his face unreadable, snow clinging to his coat. He nodded once, a brief gesture of approval. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Cora's chest swell with pride. "We need to finish this," Silas said, his voice sharp now, focused. He glanced toward the trees where the shots had come from, nodding toward the nearby ridge. "Get to the ridge. I'll cover you." Cora didn't hesitate this time. She ran toward the ridge, her feet sinking into the snow, keeping low to the ground. She moved swiftly, her eyes scanning the area, her mind sharp. Behind her, Silas continued to fire, picking off another of Steele's men who had tried to make a break for it. By the time Cora reached the top of the ridge, she could see the full scope of the situation through the falling snow. Steele's men were in full retreat now, most of them injured or too scared to keep fighting. Frank Pierce, though, was still standing, glaring at Silas from a distance. Pierce's eyes locked with Cora's, and she saw the rage in his gaze. He was furious, but there was something else there, fear. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected them to fight back. "Leave now," Silas called, his rifle aimed at Pierce, snow swirling around him. "You're not welcome here. Get on your horses and ride back to Steele." For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the soft patter of snow. Pierce's chest rose and fell as he breathed heavily, and Cora could feel the tension in the air. The standoff stretched on, each side waiting for the other to make a move. Finally, Pierce spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "This isn't over, Ward. Steele doesn't forget. You'll pay for this." He didn't wait for a response. With a sharp whistle, he turned and motioned for his men to retreat. They moved quickly, their horses galloping off into the distance, disappearing into the snowy trees. Cora stood frozen at the top of the ridge, watching them go, snow falling around her. Her heart was still racing, but there was something different now. She had survived, and she had fought back. Silas appeared beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his expression unreadable, snow dusting his face. "It's over for now," he said quietly, "but it won't be the last time." The quiet that followed the departure of Steele's men was almost as unnerving as the gunfire, the snow falling steadily, muffling the world around them. The air felt heavy, thick with the remnants of chaos. Silas stood by the ridge, his rifle still clutched in his hand, eyes scanning the snowy horizon as the tracks from the retreating horses were quickly covered. Cora, still catching her breath, stood beside him, her heart pounding as the reality of what had just happened sank in. The fight had been brief but intense, and although Steele's men were gone, for now, the danger was far from over. Silas didn't need to say it. Cora could feel it. They were both caught in something much bigger than just a small ranch in the middle of nowhere. Steele wasn't the type to back down, not after being humiliated like this. "They'll come back," Cora said, her voice tight with the truth of it, her breath clouding in the cold air. She knew the man who ran Steele's operations. He wasn't one to forgive, and he certainly wasn't one to forget. Silas didn't answer right away. He took a slow breath, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at the ranch, his home, his life, now blanketed in snow. A life that was now under threat. "We need to get out of here," he said quietly. "If Steele has men this close, they'll be back, and they'll bring more with them. We're not safe here anymore." Cora felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, colder than the snow around her. She had known this day would come, the moment when her past caught up with her. But now it wasn't just her life at risk. It was Silas's and his son's, too. "You're right," Cora said. "We can't stay here." The two of them began to walk back down the ridge, their footsteps muffled by the thick snow that covered the land. Cora glanced at Silas, noting the tension in his shoulders, the set of his jaw. He was a man who was used to fighting, but even he knew when it was time to cut his losses and run. "We'll head north," Silas continued, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts clearly racing through his mind. "There's a small town not far from here. We can lay low there until we figure out what's next." Cora nodded, the weight of his words sinking in, snow crunching under her boots. She wasn't sure where they could run where Steele's men wouldn't find them, but Silas had more experience with these things than she did. If anyone could get them out of this alive, it was him. They didn't speak much as they packed up a few supplies, everything moving at a brisk pace, snow falling around them. Cora grabbed what little she had left. A change of clothes, a few coins, and the rifle that had felt so heavy in her hands moments before. She wasn't used to this kind of life, the constant moving, the running. But it was the only option now. As they gathered what they needed, Silas's son, Jesse, appeared at the door of the cabin, snow dusting his small frame. His face was pale, his eyes wide with concern. Cora's heart ached for him. The boy had already seen too much for someone so young, but there was a strength in him, a resilience that reminded her of Silas. "We're leaving," Silas said, his voice soft but firm. "Get your things, Jesse. We gotta go." Jesse didn't argue. He nodded quickly and ran back inside, returning moments later with a small satchel, his face a mix of uncertainty and understanding, snow clinging to his hair. He knew that when Silas made a decision, it was final. As the three of them began to walk toward the horses, Cora couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled as she found herself glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see Steele's men coming over the snowy hill. But there was nothing, just the open land, the snow-covered hills, and the dim light of the rising sun filtering through the flakes. As they mounted their horses and began the long ride north, the first few miles were quiet, the snow muffling the sound of hooves. There was no sound but the soft crunch of snow under the horses' hooves, the occasional rustle of wind through the snowy trees. Cora's mind raced, though. She thought about the danger still lurking in the distance, about how far they'd have to go to outrun Steele's reach. But it wasn't just fear she felt. There was something else, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. For the first time in a long time, she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could outrun the past. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Silas. She had Jesse. They made a good distance before the evening sky began to darken, the snow falling heavier now, and the first hint of exhaustion started to settle in. Silas stopped the group at a small creek, the water partially frozen but still running. They needed to rest and water the horses. Cora felt every muscle in her body aching as she dismounted, snow clinging to her coat, but she pushed through it, setting up camp for the night. As they gathered around the fire later that evening, the snow falling softly around them, Silas spoke again. "Tomorrow, we push farther. We'll get to the town by midday if we're lucky. But Cora, we're not safe until we get there. Steele will come after us. I'm not sure how much longer we can keep ahead of him." Cora nodded, her mind spinning, her breath visible in the cold air. She had already spent too many years running from Steele, hiding in the shadows. She thought about how she had left her old life behind, only to find herself in another dangerous situation. "I'll keep running," she said, her voice steady despite the heaviness in her chest. "But not alone. Not anymore." Silas looked at her, his face softening, snowflakes catching in his eyelashes. For a brief moment, she saw something in his eyes, understanding, maybe even gratitude. He didn't say anything, just gave a small nod, but it was enough. The fire crackled between them as the snowy night settled in, and Cora couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. The road ahead was uncertain, and the danger still loomed close, but at least now, she wasn't facing it alone. And that, for now, was enough. The next day came too quickly. They had barely gotten a few hours of sleep by the time the sun started to rise. Its light diffused through the heavy snow. There was no time to rest. Steele's men were out there somewhere, probably not far behind, and Silas knew that if they didn't keep moving, they would never make it to the town. Cora had learned over the past few days to move quickly and efficiently, setting up camp, packing up their few belongings, and saddling the horses without wasting time, even in the snow. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows across the snowy land as the trio set out again, the cold morning air biting at their skin through the falling flakes. Cora, Silas, and Jesse rode in silence. The landscape stretched out before them, a vast white expanse, the occasional cactus barely visible under the snow. It wasn't a comforting sight. It was the kind of landscape that made you feel exposed, vulnerable. She kept her gaze ahead, her eyes scanning the snowy horizon for any signs of movement. But there was nothing. Not yet. They rode on, the only sounds the creaking of saddles and the soft crunch of hooves against the snow. The thought of being so exposed didn't sit well with Cora, but she kept it to herself. She wasn't going to let Silas see how scared she was. By midday, the snow was falling heavier, the cold pressing in from all sides. They had stopped to water the horses at a small stream, the water half frozen, the kind of place where you might expect to rest a little longer. But Silas didn't look comfortable. His gaze kept darting to the snowy hills on the far side of the stream, always calculating, always watching. "This is as far as we can go today," he said, his voice gruff. "There's a town just beyond that ridge. We'll need to move fast." Cora nodded, but she couldn't help the unease crawling up her spine, the snow adding to her sense of isolation. The town wasn't going to offer the kind of safety they needed, not if Steele was already looking for them. But Silas's eyes had the quiet certainty of someone who knew how to navigate danger, and she trusted him. She glanced down at Jesse, who was sitting on the edge of a rock, fiddling with a small stick, snow piling up around him. The boy was trying to act brave, but she could see the worry in his eyes. He was too young for all of this, too young to have his life turned upside down. "Jesse, you okay?" she asked gently, her voice soft, her breath clouding in the snowy air. Jesse looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "I'm fine," he said, but there was a quiver in his voice. Cora smiled, hoping to ease his fears. "You're tougher than you look, kid." He gave her a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Silas packed up their supplies, moving with the same calm precision that had guided him through every moment of danger so far, snow clinging to his coat. He didn't talk much, he never did, but his actions spoke louder than words. Cora could feel the weight of what was happening now. They weren't just running anymore. They were about to face whatever was waiting for them in the town. By the time they reached the top of the ridge, the sun was beginning to dip lower, casting an orange glow over the snowy horizon. The town below them was small, more like a cluster of homes and shops than a proper settlement. But it was a town nonetheless, its rooftops dusted with snow. It wasn't much, but it was a place to get supplies, maybe find a temporary refuge. For Cora, it felt like a lifeline. But as it descended toward the town, the sense of unease only grew, the snow falling thicker now. Something wasn't right. Silas's posture had stiffened, and Cora could see his eyes scanning the snow-covered street below, looking for any signs of trouble. They reached the town without incident, but as soon as they entered the main street, Cora felt it, a shift in the atmosphere. People glanced up at them briefly, but they didn't make eye contact, their faces half hidden by scarves and hats against the snow. The silence in the air was heavy, like the town was holding its breath. Then, out of nowhere, a loud voice rang out. "There they are." Cora froze. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned to see Marcus Steele's men coming from the other end of the street, their figures barely visible through the snow. They were on horseback, their guns drawn, and they weren't in a mood for negotiation. Silas didn't hesitate. He immediately steered his horse in the opposite direction, his hand going for the rifle strapped to his back. Cora grabbed Jesse's hand and pulled him behind her, instinct taking over, snow swirling around them. There was no time to think. They had to run. Steele's men were closing in quickly, but Silas was already taking the lead, guiding them toward a narrow alleyway that ran behind the buildings, the snow making the path slick. Cora could hear the horses thundering behind them, their riders shouting, but they weren't going to catch them, not without a fight. Silas turned the corner, his rifle already aimed at the riders coming down the alley. He fired once, then twice, knocking one of the men off his horse, the snow softening his fall. The other men pulled back, momentarily stunned. Silas took the opportunity to pull Cora and Jesse into the shadows of a nearby building. "Stay close," Silas said, his voice low and urgent. He was already scanning the area for their next move, snow falling heavily around them. "They won't stop until they have you, Cora. We need to make this count." Cora's heart pounded in her chest. Her hand tightened around Jesse's, and she could feel the tremor in his fingers as he squeezed back. "Where do we go now?" she whispered, looking to Silas for direction, her voice muffled by the snow. "Stay hidden for now," he said. "I'll draw them away, then meet you at the far end of the street. Don't make a sound." Cora nodded, swallowing the fear in her throat. She could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. They were cornered, and they had to make their stand. She trusted Silas. She had to. A few moments passed in tense silence. The sound of hooves and shouting grew louder, but there was still no sign of them turning the corner. Then a single rider appeared, his silhouette outlined in the fading light, blurred by the snow. Cora's blood ran cold as she recognized Frank Pierce. He had a gun in hand, his face twisted in a grim smile. "You can't outrun us forever, Ward," he shouted. "We're just getting started." The air was thick with the sound of gunfire as Frank Pierce advanced toward them, the snow falling heavily, muffling the chaos. His footsteps were heavy, purposeful, crunching through the snow as he drew closer. Cora's heart raced, and she could feel the cold knot of fear tightening in her stomach, colder than the snow around her. She held Jesse close to her, trying to shield him as best she could, her body trembling from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. But Silas wasn't afraid. He stood in front of her, rifle in hand, ready to defend them both, snow clinging to his coat. Cora knew that in a moment like this, Silas was all they had. He was the wall between them and the men who had already caused them so much pain. "We're not going anywhere, Pierce," Silas said, his voice low, calm, dangerously so. Frank Pierce's grin widened, and for a brief moment, Cora saw a flicker of something desperate in his eyes. He wasn't just here to capture her. This was personal. The men behind him, riding in on horseback, weren't here to negotiate either. They were here to take what they wanted by force, their figures blurred by the snow. "You think you can stop us, Ward?" Pierce taunted, his voice dripping with venom. "You're just a washed-up rancher, a man who's lost everything. What are you really protecting here?" Silas's hand tightened around the rifle, his eyes cold, snowflakes catching in his hair. He knew this wasn't about just Cora anymore. It was about standing his ground, about proving that no man, not even someone like Pierce, could just walk into his life and take what he valued most. Cora felt a pang of doubt twist inside her. She didn't want this fight. She didn't want anyone else to suffer, to lose more than they already had. But there was no turning back now. They had come this far, and Silas wasn't about to let them take him down without a fight. The riders dismounted, moving cautiously, waiting for their opportunity, their boots sinking into the snow. Cora's eyes darted to Silas, watching as he shifted his weight, preparing for whatever came next. And then it happened. The sharp crack of a gunshot rang out, echoing through the snowy alley as one of Steele's men fell, clutching his chest. Cora gasped, her hands flying up instinctively to shield Jesse from the chaos unfolding around them. Another shot fired, and then another. Silas didn't flinch. He fired again, his aim true, knocking another of Steele's men from his horse, the snow staining red beneath him. Cora's blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. The fight was no longer in their hands. There were other people involved, hidden, ready, waiting for the perfect moment in the snowy shadows. The ambush Silas had been preparing for, the one Cora had never fully understood, had finally come to fruition. These weren't just Silas's skills at work. There were others who had been watching, ready to intervene. Pierce's men started to scramble. They had no idea where the shots were coming from, but they knew they were in danger. One of them pulled out a rifle, aiming at Silas. Cora didn't think. She just reacted. Grabbing the rifle Silas had given her, she aimed at the man, pulling the trigger, snow falling around her. Her shot missed, but it was enough to make the man hesitate, just for a second. That second was enough for Silas to take him down. "Move," Silas growled, taking Cora's arm and pulling her out of the alley, snow crunching under their feet. The men were scattering now, retreating under the weight of the gunfire and the uncertainty that had gripped them. Cora was almost too stunned to speak. She looked at Jesse, who was wide-eyed, his hands still clutching the hem of her dress, snow piling on his shoulders. But Silas didn't stop. He kept pushing forward, guiding them through the winding, snow-covered streets, keeping them moving away from the chaos they had just ignited. They reached the edge of town, and Silas didn't hesitate. He led them toward a narrow path that wound through the snowy hills, heading north, away from the danger and the fight. As they rode on, the tension began to ease, though Cora could still feel her heart racing in her chest, the snow falling steadily around them. They had won the skirmish, for now, but the bigger battle was still ahead. Steele wasn't the kind of man to leave things unsettled for long. But as they moved deeper into the snowy hills, Cora couldn't help but feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to push her forward. Later that evening, as they made camp under the cover of the snowy hills, Silas sat beside the fire, staring into the flames, the snow falling softly around them. Cora watched him for a moment, wondering what was going through his mind. She had seen him face danger with calm resolve, but now, after the fight, there was something different about him, something softer. He looked up as if sensing her gaze and gave her a small, quiet nod, snowflakes melting on his face. "We've made it this far. I think we can make it all the way." Cora nodded, unsure what to say. There was a sense of finality in his words, but she knew that nothing was ever certain with men like Steele out there. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence, her breath visible in the snowy air. "For everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." Silas raised a hand, cutting her off gently. "No need to thank me. This was always about doing what was right." Cora looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since they'd started this journey together. There was strength in him, yes, but there was something else too. A quiet resilience, a determination to protect what mattered. And now, there's a part of her that was starting to believe she might just find her place in this world, with Silas and Jesse. As she sat beside the fire, feeling the warmth of its glow on her face despite the snow, Cora realized something. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a prisoner of her past. She wasn't running anymore. She had found something worth staying for. The road ahead was still uncertain, but the future didn't seem quite so terrifying anymore. As the fire flickered out, Silas stood, looking out at the snowy horizon. His silhouette was framed by the fading light of the evening, snow falling gently around him, and Cora saw in that moment the depth of everything he had endured, everything he had overcome. "Tomorrow, we head north," Silas said, turning back to her. "It's not over yet, but we're getting closer." Cora didn't know if she could ever fully outrun the ghosts of her past, but with Silas beside her, she was willing to try. And that was all she needed.